Pooja, are you okay for me to make a start? Do we have a green light?
Yes, please, Daniel. Please do begin.
Perfect, thank you. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us in what is an exciting event. It's really great to see some old standing friends as well. My name is Daniel Stavro. I'm Policy Vice Chair at the Special Education Consortium. And the first thing I would like to say is that I'm delighted to announce that our manifesto document should now be live and online and available for you to see. And a bit later in the day, Pooja, my colleague, will explain how to access it and what we would really like you to do with it. Many of you will know the Special Education Consortium is a membership grouping of 40 organizations in the sector, including trade unions, parent carer groups, education providers, disability charities, and professional associations. We work to enhance the rights of disabled children and young people and those with SEND, and we work on a consensus basis. And this manifesto has been devised and led by our parliamentary group, which was headed by Kath and Ellie, who will be speaking shortly about it. The purpose of the next hour really is to promote this manifesto and to make sure that all political parties in the run-up to the general election take into account and pay due attention to the needs of disabled children and young people and those with SEN, and do so as a matter of priority and not as an afterthought. I'm just going to set the scene in very brief manner before I hand over to my colleagues to talk in a bit more detail about the manifesto. It's fair to say I'm working on the assumption that most of you in the room will understand well the urgency of the need and the reasons which drove us to provide this manifesto document. We know that far too many children and young people are left without a suitable placement. We certainly know that far too many children and young people are waiting far too long for specialist support. We also unfortunately know that oftentimes needs are not identified in a timely manner and indeed not met also long term. This urgency is also felt across all parts of the education system, right from the early years all through to further education. We further believe that there's a need that the system actually requires a cultural shift away from the what I would call a one-dimensional approach to success and accountability related to exams, and that's in addition to the more pragmatic changes we will be proposing. I thought it might be helpful also to just to touch upon the SEND and AP improvement plan, which was published pretty much exactly a year ago. And in it, the government articulated three of the major failures of the system currently: poor outcomes for children and young people, an unsustainable financial system, and an adversarial experience faced by families of children with SEN. And SEC broadly accepts this diagnosis, and we will probably add another concern about the implementation of the current legislative framework and the protections it is supposed to afford. For these reasons, we have centered our manifesto around three themes: accountability, funding, and the voice of disabled children and young people and those with SEND and their families. And that is really what is going to drive the conversation which will unfold now. Today, we will hear from our parliamentary vice chairs, one of whom is also a parent. We'll hear some reflections from Brian Lamb, which I'm delighted to have here with us today. And most importantly, we'll hear from two young people who have agreed to share their experiences with us today. And before I'll hand back to Pooja, I'll just say that from our point of view, whatever colour the next government takes and is, we really must ensure that they act to resolve the current crisis and provide all of our children and young people with the education they deserve. So that was by way of introduction, and I'll hand back over to you, Pooja.
Thank you, Daniel. So we are now going to talk about our key asks and the three priorities that we've listed within our manifesto documentation. So first, I'd like to hand over to one of our valued SEC members and part of SEND Community Team Alliance, Gillian.
Hello, I'm not sure if you can see me. Can you see me now? Yeah. Yeah, so my name is Gillian Doherty and I'm the co-founder of Send Action and Send Community Alliance, and I've recently joined Special Needs Jungle as well as a director. So we are all volunteers, parents, and represent disabled children and their families. And I'm really pleased to be able to talk about accountability and the fact that that's a key manifesto item for SEC, because in surveys of our families, it's consistently the single biggest area of concern that they raise. It's always ahead of funding, and I think that really reflects their priorities. So I'm really happy to be speaking about that today. I just wanted to briefly talk about our family's experience. So I'm the parent of a 10-year-old with Down syndrome who attends a mainstream village primary school, and so his lifespan pretty much corresponds with the SEND reforms. And over the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been re-entering the SEND system and trying to get any HCP for him, and have experienced some of the best and pretty much the worst of the accountability system. He was turned away by around about 75% of schools, and the remaining schools were concerned about funding. We've had to complain almost constantly to get any provision at all for him. We have tried dispute resolution, but key decision makers refused to participate. We've initiated 2 judicial reviews, one of which is still in progress. And tomorrow, which is World Down Syndrome Day, we will be celebrating with a trip to the First Tier Tribunal, a full day hearing to access support for Jack. So we have an EHCP, and I know that many people say that that is a golden ticket, and I'm not quite sure how people can say that. I don't think anything could be further from the truth for any family who's been on that journey. I would say that our journey was much easier than most of the families that we have contact with. And so that is really kind of what we don't always see when we talk about golden tickets is the impact of that on families. So in our case, it was delays to access to specialist teaching provision, delays to access to support and training that school staff needed, delays in access to social care provision that meant our son was unable to access school clubs or wraparound care, transport being refused, health not being involved, me not being able to work, and delays to medical treatment that I needed as well. This may seem anecdotal, but it isn't, because so many families have the same experience. And unfortunately, accountability is getting worse at the moment, which is why I'm particularly pleased that SEC is talking about it, because it isn't a priority as part of the change programme. And I think it really needs to be. Local authorities are routinely not complying with their statutory duties. We have examples of local authorities that complete EHCPs within statutory timescales in 0% or 1% of cases, which is clearly just very, very poor. Tribunal appeal rates are going up. Families succeed, they win, but I think we all know what winning looks like. In over 90% of cases, the time to access appeals is going up, with some families, including ours, waiting more than a year to access those appeals. And unfortunately, I think what should be an exceptional process is actually increasingly being treated as a routine part of the process, which is essentially bringing the tribunal service to its knees. The same is happening with the local authority, with the local government and social care ombudsman. Complaints have increased to the point where they are now, due to capacity issues, limiting the cases that they investigate. 92 to 94% of those are upheld, depending on what you read. The complaints have tripled. The need for specialist places is going up, because mainstream schools are not adequately supported and resourced to be inclusive, and those that are not inclusive are not held to account. Special schools are dangerously stretched beyond capacity, and we're in a situation where local authorities' finances, and particularly those local authorities who are subject to financial constraints through safety valve agreements and the Delivering Better Value programmes, this is directly contributing to worse decision making and unlawful practice, because they're having to make very difficult financial decisions. And this is a serious and urgent problem that needs to be addressed, because the money needs to go in and the resourcing needs to happen at that kind of grassroots level before you can cut off the supply further up the line. So accountability matters. It really matters. It's the single most important thing, but actually it really connects to the two other key asks that SEC have put forward as well, because without the proper funding and resourcing and without a specialist workforce, you know, accountability can't happen. And there's no point in having legal rights unless those legal rights can be enforced. And the problem with the current system is that that burden falls disproportionately on the parents of disabled children, the carers of disabled children, and the risk is being pushed down onto those disabled children, so that actually when resources are cut, and they are being cut at the moment, it's them who suffer the consequences of that. So I think it's just incredibly important that we have a proper system and a culture and will to ensure that accountability happens.
Thank you so much, Gillian. We're going to now go to Kath Lothar, who's also at the Parliamentary Vice Chair of SEC, who's going to talk about our manifesto ask around long-term funding strategy.
Thank you, Pooja, and thank you, Gillian, also for articulating so well the importance of resourcing and funding for all our children and young people. And thank you so much for sharing your story about Jack, because that just makes it feel so much more human in terms of the aspect. We are not asking for abstract life changes for real life children, young people. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm also an educational psychologist, and I'm the General Secretary of the Association of Educational Psychologists. So I know very well the impact of funding shortages on access to specialists for schools, and also early years and post-16, particularly around educational psychologists. But I know that it is a much wider situation. So SEC for the next government is to ensure that public funding is sufficient to meet all our babies, children and young people's needs as and when these arise. Now, talk about sufficiency, but the official figures, you know, we are being told that it's record funding to, in inverted commas, and they say, but what the actual figures show is that a marginal increase of per pupil spending since 2010, but also increases to high needs funding, and the current spend is just over £10.5 billion, which sounds like a ridiculously high amount of money. But for me, I think that just shows a real problem with the system, because even though these funding figures are very high, they say, well, we are told they're very high. The official figures report that the number of students identified with special education needs and disabilities, as per how it's reported, that has increased over the last 6 years. And for those with education and health and care plans, there's been an increase of 63% since the implementation of the new code of practice. So I feel the numbers show the money's gone up, but realistically on the ground, they also show, other numbers show that our students' needs have grown exponentially and are not being met in a timely way. We know that the current system, education altogether, is fraught with classes above statutory limits, shortages of early years places, shortages of teachers, support staff and specialists to provide much needed advice and interventions. And this is within the context of a post-pandemic world, worsening mental health, a cost of living crisis, and after 14 years almost of austerity. The babies, children and young people like Jack do not have their needs identified early enough, and they do not have the appropriate supports put in place as soon as necessary. Instead, they find education more distressing, their needs become more complex and entrenched, and ultimately, although I'm loath to make this point, more expensive. It is no wonder that in today's World Happiness Report, our young people are amongst the least happy in the world. One of the authors, Professor Richard Lanyard, implicates our education in what can be seen as a long-standing and continually growing crisis. This ask is about making sure that the funding is available at the right point in the system, and this means at the earliest opportunity and for all young people. This is because our babies, children and young people deserve better. They also have the basic human right to an inclusive education at all levels and stages, to enable their full development and to promote their potential and sense of dignity and self-worth so that they can participate effectively in a free society. This is enshrined in the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and on the Rights of the Child, and both of these conventions have been ratified by the UK. In 2007, the UN Rapporteur sharply criticised the UK's performance on meeting the rights of particularly disabled people, and this included our provision of inclusive education. And on Monday, they submitted a follow-up report which noted further regressions, despite the UK government saying that they were taking steps to address issues. And this is absolutely not good enough. And that is why we are asking for an increase in funding from the next government so that the funding is available to meet the needs of everyone aged 0 to 25, as stipulated by the Code of Practice, that the current debilitating deficits are written off so that local authorities can begin to deliver services rather than further budget cuts, that we ring-fence the funding so that children and young people have access to specialist services, so that early identification of need and provision of early intervention and preventative support is in place, that there is high quality inclusive practice and full accountability, as Gillian referenced. We need to see an improvement in the way in which needs are addressed within national funding formula, and we need to see high quality training to all education staff, early years through to post-16. We need training for key professionals, and we need that funded. So key professionals like educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, and occupational therapists to ensure workforce sufficiency. And by funding of training, I mean also more training and more places for those professionals. We need to have established national guidance for access to early years funding, and we need parity in funding mechanisms for post-16 education. We also need increased funding to social care and health budgets so that they contribute to the education, health and care needs supports, because it is not purely about education. And finally, we need to have funding available so that interagency coordination is improved. So we really hope, again, as Daniel said, whatever colour, whatever hue of the next government, that they take the rights of our disabled children and young people and those with special educational needs seriously and put the money where their mouth is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kath. And finally, I'm going to pass on to Ellie Costello, who's also our Parliamentary Vice Chair, who's going to talk about the importance of voice of our disabled children, young people, and those with SEN and their families.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for this, because I think it's an important moment to reflect on, and the manifesto, I think, is extremely timely. I'm here today, as everyone mentioned, as Parliamentary Vice Co-Chair for the Special Education Consortium, which is one of the most exciting policy areas, I think, as a consensus-led coalition. And I'm also here as a parent carer to two wonderful young people with additional needs spanning health, social care and education. And that journey led me to join Square Peg, where I work as Executive Director representing the children and families whose children struggle to attend, access or remain in education. And as we all know, attendance and persistent absence is a huge challenge at the moment. Yesterday, I spoke at my local council meeting in my home county of Warwickshire, which has faced its own challenges in recent months, and handed over a national petition which had gathered more than 30,000 signatures in a few weeks to present to the council around ableism and attitudes in systems, but also to call on national to prioritise send funding so that local areas can implement and deliver what they are expected to. And the petition, I think, really hit and evidenced the overwhelming interest at the moment in SEND, which is exciting for us, but is long overdue because far too many families are falling through cataclysmic voids nationally, not just in Warwickshire. Some of you may have read David Davis MP's letter to the Prime Minister regarding SEND funding ahead of the spring budget. And he wrote an absolutely exceptional article in The Sun, personal article, in which he astutely reflected that he'd won the lottery of life life as an able-bodied grammar school boy, but that his granddaughter didn't even receive a ticket. And as a parent carer myself, to raising children with complex needs, it's the greatest privilege and the hardest path I've ever walked. And I can assure you that no parent chooses it. No parent wants the attention. No parent wants to be continually trying to represent a child in need. All we want is for our children to have an equitable start and to be on the same level as those with better privileges and more resources at their disposal. So as parents, we're often framed, as Gillian said, as chasing a golden ticket. And I can assure you that that is so far from the truth. We're certainly not out there expecting the royal treatment, but rather, as David Davis observed, our children are already multiply disadvantaged, with protections and entitlements in law which are too often ignored, leaving professionals in untenable positions where they simply cannot do what they are asked to do. Structural inequalities are one of the biggest barriers our children face, and implicit disability discrimination adds to the burden. And I think this really touches on a capacity deficit, because I come from the place that nobody gets up in the morning and decides to intentionally fail children and families. Nobody wants to harm them. But actually, unless we are seeing the world through the eyes of a disabled child and their parent and carers, and listening and building systems with them, for them, and alongside them, we're going to continue to make the same mistakes. And flattening the curve of need is not necessarily going to magically make the 20% of children with disabilities and additional needs disappear, because nobody grows out of needs. What we want is that we plan, expect, and provide for all children with needs, especially those with additional needs. So I think listening to the voice of the child and the parent is absolutely essential if we're going to achieve and build and deliver on solutions that are fit for purpose, built in, not bolt on, not so that we're working from a place of by design rather than afterthought, which not only waste money and resource, but actually fail enormous numbers. So inclusion matters. Inclusion isn't something that needs to be specifically quantified. It is something that really, for me, is a philosophy. It matters because keeping children together, educating and raising children together does build stronger, more cohesive, more tolerant societies with adults who are accustomed to thinking about planning for those that are less able than them and that are multiply disadvantaged. So inclusion for me absolutely is at the heart of everything. Accountability matters, and as has been touched on this morning, the routes of redress are becoming the norm, and absolutely can't be the case. It's not on the shoulders of families to fight the systems. It's not on the shoulders of children to turn up at settings where they're not wanted or not welcomed or not supported, because that really does disable them further, impacting their identity and self-esteem for life and their mental health. So when those with differences, disabilities and additional needs are placed at the heart of them, tolerance, equity and stronger communities follow, in which everybody wins. And as a consensus-led consortium of over 40 diverse organisations, this manifesto offers a genuine roadmap for the next government to follow. Nothing about us without us is truer now than it ever was. And by ensuring the education system is accountable, investing and listening, working with us in partnership, outcomes will improve. So please do take a look at the manifesto. Please engage with SEC, and we look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and thank you to the whole SEC team for their contribution to the manifesto and sharing our ask for the next government. I'm very pleased to now welcome Brian Lamb, who's going to share his experiences and his views on the current challenges and how he feels the manifesto can support. Over to you, Brian.
Hello, good morning, and thank you very much for SEC for inviting me back, if you like, to talk at this really important launch of your manifesto. And it's obviously very timely, coming 10 years after the anniversary of the implementation of the reforms. And like previous speakers, I'm going to assume that with such a knowledgeable audience that there is actually already a consensus about where the current failings are in implementing the current reforms, and consensus still that despite all of those failings, the principles behind the reforms are still the right ones. So I really welcome the manifesto's focus on how can we ensure that the original promise of the reforms can still be achieved. I think, as many people have been reflecting, there's many problems with the way the reforms have been implemented, and those in some areas are getting worse. I think we also shouldn't ignore, however, the real areas of good practice, and in some sense it's those areas of good practice and where the reforms have worked that give us still the optimism that if we can get the right things in place to actually address where the failings have been, then we need to ensure that that happens, because the principles that were actually established in 2014 around personalisation, around the greater role of parents and voice for children and young people, about an accountable system that focused on better outcomes for children and young people, are still the right ones. But we do know there's a long way still to go, and I think it's disappointing to see that even under the new Ofsted area framework, there are still more local authorities getting the lowest rating than those getting the highest rating, with an even larger number judged inconsistent. So I think that's just another illustration of people have been saying this morning of the great challenge there still is within the system to make this happen. But so I really welcome the manifesto as a way of actually trying to address some of that. And I want to just focus in very broad brush terms on one or two of the key elements in the manifesto and how it could make a difference, and then also talk about another area which I think is a means to actually implement some of the recommendations that the manifesto is talking about. So if we look first very briefly at accountability, I also want to merge in this looking at the local offer as a strategic planning tool. And we know that one of the key aims of the legislation was actually to increase accountability, especially to parents. But as recent reviews have shown, there are issues of accountability between LA and parents, between LAs and schools, and between schools and parents. And that was very well illustrated in some of the previous discussions, especially Gillian's contribution. And yet, at the same time, one of the key aims of the reforms through the local offer was the capacity to promote co-production and then help parents with the better information, as well as the co-production through the offer, hold the system to account. And yet we know that the local offer isn't being utilised to the extent it could be, both in terms of the strategic intent to change what was happening, and also in terms of the information that was related to that. And so recent research showed that reliable information from the local offer is still questionable in many local authorities, according to recent research by Matthews and his colleagues for the HOPE study. And is still leaving parents and young people without crucial information to make decisions and interrogate what is available. And therefore, I think we need to look at, as part of the improvement plan and the whole notion of national standards, how those national standards integrate as accountability measures, and how local authorities and settings are going to be held accountable against those national standards. And I think it's also important to recognise how those national standards work across not just education, but health and social care, and what the gaps are in the accountability mechanisms around that. But I would still come back to the local offer as a crucial place where discussions can happen about strategic engagement with parents, where accountability can happen with parents and young people, and where the system then can be improved as part of all of that. I think we also need to look at how schools can be held more accountable for what is, for the whole concept of what is ordinarily available. And I think the manifesto is really helpful in focusing on the whole concept of ordinarily available and how that can be used as an accountability mechanism so parents are much clearer. And I'll come back to that. But also then local authorities' role in challenging schools about what is ordinarily available within those schools and what they can expect. And I still, probably one of the few people in the world that still has some expectations that the school information report is also underutilised and could be used either in conjunction with a much more enhanced notion of what is ordinarily available and how that's reported on, or even turned into that mechanism. I would also really support the manifesto's call for widening accountability mechanisms. And from my inquiry onwards through to the SEC Manifesto, there's been call after call for an expanded role for local government and care ombudsmen to simplify and speed up the whole complaints process. And I think this could have a much bigger role in all those areas. So there's just some very quick thoughts on accountability. And obviously, that accountability and those accountability mechanisms need properly funding, has already been argued. To focus a bit more on the concept of the ordinarily available offer, historically there's obviously been a huge tension, to put it mildly, about what's been available inside and outside of a statutory plan. And we can see in the current implementation that one of the obvious failings of the 2014 reforms was the lack of focus on what was ordinarily available in schools, and ensuring that offer was much better and could maintain the trust of parents. And that's one of the reasons we've seen the huge drive towards education, health and care plans. And those are obviously hugely important for parents, and it's essentially those obviously need to be there for parents and children that need them. But as the previous speakers have already alluded to, the fact that the offer within schools, the lack of specialist support, the lack of funding, the lack of training at appropriate levels, has all increased the lack of confidence in what is available as part of that ordinarily available offer. And so we need a much stronger focus on that. And as the manifesto argues, a much stronger focus on the specialist support and training that needs to be available as part of that. But that again needs funding properly, and that's also one of the great failures at the moment, is seeing where that funding is going to come from that can go directly into schools, as well as what's funding in the high needs block, and especially the specialist support that needs to be available into schools for that to happen. And certainly in my own work with the National Sensory Impairment Partnership, you can see the pressure on those specialist services and the ability of those services to support schools when they're getting ever increasing caseloads. So I think the ordinarily available offer and improving that is going to be fundamental, and is obviously fundamental as a part of what that local offer looks like for parents as part of all of that. I also want to introduce something that isn't so directly addressed in the manifesto, but I think is assumed in a lot of its concepts. And that's the whole way in which the Rights Agenda and the Equality Act from 2010 and the additions in 2012 to make reasonable accommodation available for individual pupils has been underused and also under-enforced. And I think it's really interesting in looking at evidence around this, that in that research on local offers, they concluded that very few local offers mentioned the Equality Act 2010 or stated objectives to ensuring that it was complied with in the next phase of local offer development, which is a requirement in the Code of Practice. This common oversight of local offer websites is symbolically troubling and could indicate potentially lower prioritisation of young people's disability rights. And another similar review found that of access plans found that adherence is often lacking, with parents often unaware of its existence, access measures non-existent or poorly implemented, and that the framework is poorly enforced. So what we have is a whole rights framework that could actually cover over 3/4 of children with SEN and disability, that is still under-enforced and underutilised, and yet could provide a counterweight in terms of an approach that embeds principles around equity and about rights, and also at the same time gives a legal entitlement to services without necessarily going through an education, health and care plan. And yet we're still not utilising this as a means and a method to make sure that the 2014 reforms have validity and actually can be progressed forward. And I think some of the key principles within the manifesto could be well achieved through a greater focus on incorporating the rights agenda more centrally into the implementation plan as it goes forward. And then lastly, I just want to look at the position of parents, children and young people. And I think despite all the challenges, I've certainly seen a fundamental change, and I think parents groups have seen a fundamental change in engagement in the last 10 years, both for parents and for young people. And yet at the same time, we know that they're still not properly supported, properly listened to in many areas. I think what's really interesting, if you look at the Ofsted area reviews, that in those local authorities that are really good at parental engagement and young people's engagement, they are oftentimes the ones that are achieving the best evaluation from Ofsted in all of this. And I think there's an obviously very clear cause and effect between those authorities that are fully engaging parents and young people and ensuring that there are more appropriate services as a result of all of that. And again, there we need to ensure that we're embedding that better, not just through the local offer mechanisms, but across the whole of the system in education, health and care plans, in parents and schools before education, health and care plans as part of their plan for their child, as well as in the strategic engagement of parents across the system. I think we also need to end some of the negative framing that's come in the last couple of years around parents exercising their rights within the system. It simply cannot physically be the case that parents going to tribunal, however contested that is, and however much we wish that parents didn't have to go to tribunal to get their rights, it is not that is driving the big change in the system towards education, health and care plans. How could it be when appealable decisions are only 2.3% of those decisions around education, health and care plans? I think also it undermines and is corrosive of the consensus approach we need of parents and local authorities and the system working together to make it work better for all. And as previous speakers have said, I don't think this is professionals not wanting to do this in the system. I think it's a systems issue about how we ensure that parents are fully engaged and young people are fully engaged at every level to ensure that they can engage with the system and that the system listens to what they're saying. And we know from all the research that where that happens, services are more appropriate, and for whatever particular level of funding is available, that you get more appropriate and better services and you get more trust, parents and young people within the system, and outcomes also improve. And that's what we want to see from, and that was the whole rationale for that great big drive to ensure that parents were included. And then just to conclude, I think I really want to welcome the manifesto. I know I've only touched on some of the elements within it. It's a pathway that outlines some of the principles for reform and change. I think with a greater focus on ordinarily available offer, tightened accountability with additional funding, greater engagement of parents and young people, and I would personally add a greater focus on the rights agenda, I think it contains the prospect of actually realising some of the aspirations and objective of the 2014 reforms. I know how effective SEC can be, and I wish you all really good luck, whatever the political complexion of the next government, in getting these changes in the manifesto. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Really lovely to hear from everyone today. I'm really pleased to now welcome Jacob, who's a young person who would like to share his views and kind of the challenges he experienced in his school life. So Jacob, please to start when you feel ready to.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. My name is Jacob Lennon. I am 16 years old and I live in Stockport, Greater Manchester. I am an autism advocate and a lived experience trainer with my local council. As someone who slipped through the cracks of the education system and ultimately was failed by the systems that are currently in place, my experience of the education system is a negative one. I'd say this is unfortunate. However, in a survey completed by the National Autism Society in 2023, only 26% of autistic young people feel happy within a school environment. My negative journey with education began when I was in year 7 back in 2018. My school was a new school, part of a multi-academy trust that opened the same year. So essentially, we were the founding year group. Cracks began to show in the support very early on for me, with no learning support within the lessons and a very limited staff offering. Something that I have always struggled with within education settings is interaction with peer groups, and this is highly common for autistic young people, and something that schools are not equipped to support with adequately. In the same survey completed by the National Autism Society, over 51% of autistic young people wanted help on how to understand their peers. Now, bearing in mind, without an adequate understanding, an autistic young person would severely struggle to comprehend conversations with their peers. They could get overwhelmed more easily or may avoid conversations with peers altogether. And this causes a rapid deterioration in the mental health of autistic young people and causes a feeling of isolation. Personally, I've had feelings of both bad mental health and isolation as a result of a lack of support, and also due to a lack of support in friendships as well, which is a very big something that is very common within autistic young people in education, is that they do struggle with social interaction. But then again, there is not the support needed there to make a change to that, which is very unfortunate, and it's going to lead to more feelings of isolation and poor mental health. Schools also do not have enough funding to meet demand. There are over 180,000 autistic pupils across England, with 7 in 10 autistic young people feeling that school would be better if the teacher understood them and knew how to support them. That statistic is quite frankly damning, and quite frankly shows that something needs to change. My support needs were not met at all, and anything that was proposed was put into place far too late for me. And I did not receive an EHCP until I was in year 10, so just before I took my GCSEs, which was far too late, and in essence did not give me as much support as I was required to have. As a result of this, I walked away with 3 GCSEs, which was something that I tried my absolute best on, but again, with the lack of support I was given, and the fact that I essentially worked in a small room in the student support department for my final year in secondary school, with limited tutoring, with no contact with my subject teachers, was just quite frankly something that I was proud to achieve. But at the same time, the amount of stuff that I've had to overcome and the barriers that I've had to go through to get to where I am today, quite frankly, I should not have had to go through if I had the correct support. The one-size-fits-all approach to education needs to end. Education needs to be tailored to the individual, and if not, those statistics that I've shared with you today will only increase and will only deteriorate further. The question that needs to be asked is, why does this keep occurring? Why are we seeing the deterioration time and time again? The answer is simple. It's because of a universal lack of understanding and a lack of inclusion. The lack of training and educational material provided to staff around autism means that a pretty alarming statistic has been concluded, with autistic young people twice as likely to be excluded than their peers, which again is due to a lack of understanding and a lack of education on the education setting's behalf for their staff. Now, other statistics that I'm going to share with you, all of these statistics are quite damning, and I'm sure you all agree with me that change is needed in terms of what I'm sharing with you today. More than 1 in 4 parents waited for over 3 years for support for their autistic child, according to the National Autism Society. Again, what I'm trying to get across is that there is a domino effect here. The effect that it's going to have on the young person, the effect it's going to have on those around them, including their parents. And it's just a domino effect that keeps going. And it's not one that we're seeing any improvement with at all. So again, this is shocking, and again just shows a lack of inclusion, and that the one-size-fits-all approach just simply can't meet demand, and it's not built for purpose. Another statistic which goes one step further to proving this is that only 53% of autistic young people said they have someone they can go to in school if there is a problem. My own personal experience here, I would 100% agree with that statistic. The student support offering in my school was very limited. There were periods when I was left in a department on my own, when I was in crisis, when there was just simply no support around. A lot of the stuff that I've done on my own. So I'm a very independent person anyway. But the fact is, and the point that I'm trying to get across, is that as an able-bodied autistic young person who is on the high functioning side of autism, shouldn't have had to go through that alone, even though I was able to. I still needed that support. So a lot of what I've been through essentially is invisible to teaching staff, and it's very much sort of had a domino effect on me personally, which I'll go into a bit more now. So my education experience was an extremely difficult one, with a lack of support, a lack of experience, and overall a lack of overall understanding of autism. So when I got into year 11, obviously it was time to think about next steps, moving on to college, what I wanted to do with my life. And again, I had no support in that. So I had no support in finding colleges, having a look at provision. I was very poorly informed about that. So colleges I applied to on my own with no support at all. I attended the college days with no support at all from anyone. And I had very limited interaction with my nominated key worker as well, which unfortunately did go through several changes due to staff leaving the school. My school really did struggle with retention of staff in terms of learning support. The offer was just not built with autistic young people and those with special educational needs and disabilities at all. So the next statistics I'm going to share with you now really just do prove this, and it's that only 26% of autistic young people are in any form of employment. Now that is just absolutely shocking, as I'm sure you can imagine. With only 26% of autistic young people in any form of employment at all, just goes to show that there is an institutionalized lack of support in terms of employment, in terms of education, and then in terms of training for education staff as well. Just goes one step further to proving that change is needed and change does need to happen now. So for myself, I found my true calling quite early. Opportunities myself were not few and far between, which was quite lucky. And I joined the FLARE group, so the Council for Disabled Children's advisory group to the Department for Education back in 2020. And I founded my own advocacy group in Stockport back in 2021 for autistic young people to make change. So that was very rewarding for me to do. Advocacy has really given me a platform to share my experiences for the greater good, and the projects I've undertaken, such as co-designing, co-delivering workshops, writing numerous blogs, taking part in a podcast, has just been truly amazing. And the people who I've had the privilege of working with have been amazing as well. Everyone is just so kind and supportive, and it's exactly where I want to be. Luckily, I had aspirations of where I wanted to be when I had no support at all. The negative experiences that I had, I was turning into drive. I had a passion for this. It was something that I wanted to continue onwards with. So I decided to use my negative experience for the greater good and get involved with these projects. So having went down the conventional route of going to college, I decided that college wasn't right for me, and I decided that I wanted to pursue advocacy full time. So I left college, which was a very big decision for me to make, going into somewhere with no routine. However, it has proven to me that it was for the greater good, having that time away from education, exploring other options, and it's just been very rewarding for me to do so. Because the one thing that education settings seem to forget time and time again is that education is not for everyone. There's going to be alternative education provisions that may be better for autistic young people. There could be, just like me, people who want to pursue other projects that aren't, in the traditional educational bracket, but will still, do the greater good for autistic young people and will allow them to get an unconventional education, but something that is extremely rewarding and is going to help improve their self-esteem, their confidence. Quite a lot of these things that I keep referencing, obviously, are very important as well as actual education. So as of yesterday, in fact, I have now found employment with an advocacy and support organisation as a young people's champion. So again, going one step further in my advocacy career, it is now officially a career which I'm extremely proud of. So obviously this is a dream come true for me. This is what I've wanted to pursue since day one. But I now look to turn my negative experience into drive and want to try and ensure that no autistic young person has to go through the same experience that I did, no matter what it takes. So just to briefly recap, the education system is not fit for purpose, and the one-size-fits-all approach needs to end, and a new system, purpose-built for autistic young people, needs to be introduced. And the overall SEND system for neurodivergent pupils and those with disabilities needs to be re-examined and redesigned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was so articulately well put on your experiences, and thank you for sharing such personal, your personal journey. Amazing to see that you've got a new exciting job that you're excited about. So congratulations on that. I'm very proud now to introduce Caris, who's also a young person as part of Flair, to share her views on the SEC Manifesto. So Caris, whenever you're ready.
Hi everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. It is great to be here. I wanted to start with some fundamental questions. When you wake up in the morning, what do you see? When you wander around your town or your school, what did you feel? And when you interact with others, what do you think? For many of us, I think these seem like possibly trivial inquiries, moments of our daily routine that pass by without really a second thought. Perhaps your alarm jolts you awake, reluctantly pulling you from the comforts of sleep. My point is, however, maybe exactly that for some of us, these are trivial questions, ones that you've never really had to think about. But the reality is that for some children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, like me, these questions are constantly on our mind. As someone with a physical disability which fluctuates, some days my body can decide to completely give up on me. It means that when I wake up, the first thing I see is whether today is one of those days. In a bustling city or in a school, it means that every crowded street or school corridor during that kind of crunch time then becomes a potential obstacle course, with little regard for unintended collision and the repercussions of it. When I interacted with others in education, I felt all manners of awkward, especially if I was defending my right to certain provisions or having to talk about my worst days with strangers or cold professionals. Trivial questions to many, therefore, but constant reminders to us. Every day, disabled people across the UK are reminded that this society was not made for them, that there are barriers around our physical and social participation with daily life. And these daily reminders of societal barriers underscore the urgent need for comprehensive investment in supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. The challenges we face go beyond mere inconvenience. Overcoming them is crucial to our ability to lead fulfilling lives, to access opportunities, to realize our potential, and to contribute meaningfully to society. The government therefore must commit to adequate funding for specialist services. When essential resources are scarce, when support services are under-resourced and overstretched, the consequences reverberate far beyond inconvenience. They seep into every aspect of our lives. But for those of us with SEND, these services aren't luxuries. These are lifelines and gateways to independence. Long-term investment, therefore, isn't just a financial commitment, but a moral imperative, a recognition of our shared responsibility to ensure that every child, regardless of ability, has access to the tools and resources that they need to thrive. It's an investment in dignity, in equity, and in the inherent worth of every individual. When I was in school, I benefited from weekly sessions with a qualified physiotherapist who helped me build up my muscle strength and know how to do exercises that would help me, even on days when my muscles were weak. Just as I was starting to learn and to improve, however, I was effectively discharged from the service, told that there was not sufficient funding or time for me. When I questioned the decision and asked for support again, this was denied. This not only hindered my physical progress, especially as I was recovering from an injury at the time, but also sent me a powerful message that the service didn't really care about my bad days or really helping me to improve whatsoever. All they cared about was that I wasn't permanently at my worst. The messages we send to disabled children should be considered really carefully. I'm sure we can all agree that actions speak louder than words after all. If we support their needs, we provide them with powerful affirmations of their worth, their potential, and their rightful place in society. When we convey their message that their needs matter, that they are entitled to have those needs supported, we instill in them a sense of dignity, self-worth, and belonging. Conversely, when these messages are absent, or worse, replaced by damaging narratives of limitation or inadequacy, the consequences can be profound. One of these systems in which messages are really important, but also actions can be especially damaging, is obviously the education system. When it comes to special educational needs and disabilities, accountability within the education system is not only crucial, but also deeply personal. Despite attending an amazing mainstream school that met my needs in many ways, I still had to fight for some adjustments. Often, for me, it wasn't even a matter of fighting for it, but the school didn't tell me what I could have. I never had extra time or rest breaks until a few weeks before my GCSE exams, where it was suggested that it could be useful to me. I never had an EHCP, but this had its own disadvantages, with relying on my faith and my trust in the school to access any support that I wanted. And for friends of mine across the country, they've had long, ongoing fights for support to access education, which should be a basic right for all. This barrier to reasonable adjustments is obviously in part mediated by a lack of funding, but also I think partially pervaded by damaging stereotypes and views of what disability should look like, which influence the care that people think we should have or that we need, without consultation with what the young person thinks. I remember PE classes vividly, when new teachers would accuse me of faking not being able to run as I walked here fine, or being told after going upstairs early for a class to avoid the rush of students that I needed to go back down again and proceed back up when the bell went, and that the extra exercise might do my disability some good. With some teachers, I felt allyship, I felt understanding, and I felt a deep desire in them to help me in any way that they could. With others, I felt outcast, ostracized, and ignored. This is why I think it is vital that we keep the education system accountable. Holding the education system accountable for SEND means ensuring that every child, regardless of their abilities, receives the individualized support and accommodations that they need to succeed. It means fostering a culture of inclusion where the progress and well-being of students with SEND are prioritized and monitored closely. Ultimately, accountability in the education system isn't just about meeting standards. It's about upholding the rights and dignity of every child, ensuring that no one is left behind or overlooked. It's about ensuring that the present generation don't end up with the same scars as the past. And, while I may be biased, who better to drive this policy than children and young people? It goes back to one of my favourite sayings, and that one I know that was mentioned earlier, of nothing about us without us. By centering children and young people in this policy-making process, we ensure that their needs, aspirations, and concerns are not only heard, but also prioritized. Children and young people have so many ideas to bring to the table, so many insights that deserve not to be overlooked, and we really want to help. Putting our voices at the heart also sends a powerful message that our opinions matter, that we have agency in shaping the world around us, and that we are valued members of society along with everyone else. This not only cultivates a sense of civic engagement and responsibility, but also nurtures critical thinking skills and leadership qualities from a young age. Ultimately, placing children and young people at the heart of policy is not just a matter of principle. It's a pragmatic investment in building a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable society for generations to come. Our voices are not just the voices of tomorrow. We're the voices that shape our present and define our collective future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karis. That was very emotional and very well articulated. Thank you to all of our speakers today. We're really pleased to have such a great turnout and all your support of the SEC Manifesto. It is now live. The link is in the chat. Please do share it on social media, share it within your networks. I know that SEC will now be working very hard to ensure that the next government, whoever they may be, listen to these priorities and take them seriously. Thank you again for joining today and all your support. This has been recorded and will be sent out to everyone, so please do share wider. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining. Bye.